You're listening to the Adventurous Weirdos podcast by WatcherDM. Learn more at WatcherDM.com or come join our Patreon at patreon.com/WatcherDM. Stay weird. We are now recording. We're live. The Adventurous Weirdos podcast. Austin Holm.
Yo!
And I'm Gabriel Hernandez. That's what they call me. And yeah, this week we are doing our podcast. We're recording it remotely. As Austin is out of town and I am in my mole hole man cave pit for a breeding season.
From the mountain to the mole hole.
Yeah, from the mountain to the mole hole. How's Apex treating you?
It's cold and there's like 6 people in the whole town because ski season hasn't started.
They call this mud season, right? Nice. Mud season is...
Yeah, it's kind of mud and snow season right now. We're between seasons. We can't decide if we want to be shitty brown sludge or freezing white crust.
My sister lives in Colorado, and in Breckenridge, in Summit County, and they have there's summer tourists, there's winter tourists, and then there's what they call mud season, which is everybody leaves except for those who actually want to stick it out. But yeah, it's hard to get anything, like the grocery stores. You can't get services. Like nobody's there no plumbers, there's no mechanics.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like here. There's not a store. Your closest store there's a weed shop on native land about a 30-minute drive away.
Well, that's not bad. At least you can get some weed.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Don't want to see this halfling without his weed, man.
Yeah, life's little necessities.
Totally. Well, speaking of necessities, we necessarily finally released the thing we've been talking about releasing for...
We released 2 things.
We released 2 things, but I want to talk about the one thing first. Warp Crawl, hotly debated topic. Do you release your AI product that slays, totally slaps, but is made using AI tools? From before that was a big deal. And we did.
We could talk... Yeah, we did. We could talk all day about the AI art thing. And, honestly, I feel like there's a lot more interesting things about Warp Crawl, I hope.
Yes.
Than the art in it. That's the writer's perspective. I always hope the writing's more interesting than the art.
Well, as someone who played it pretty extensively, I feel like that game really... I just played like a little solo quest crawl. I had a crazy idea about how to run it. Where, like, I'll show you. Instead of, like, laying out the cards, you just have your deck, and then you just lay out what you've kind of explored on the hex map. So you don't have to have the hex-shaped cards. You can kind of... Also, like, I don't have to... I just keep the cards I've drawn in one pile, and the ones I haven't in another. It's kind of like an interesting way of doing a solo. Anyway,
it is interesting.
Yeah, so I was playing this earlier, and I was thinking about how much more stuff is in Warp Crawl, despite the game having effectively identical bones. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I think it's interesting because, thinking about this earlier today, I think it really has a lot to do with the genre. Like, for fantasy, and to a lesser extent post-apocalyptic fantasy, which we did with
Waste Crawl.
Things are very simple. There's good, there's bad, you do this, you do that. And I think what we found when we started doing Warp Crawl is that, roles became very important. The idea that, like, you have to politically justify your expensive space program became kind of a core component.
Yeah.
The added interest in materialism became a huge thing, and most of all, I think, the idea of the captain's log sort of became a huge impetus for filling out. I mean, like you say, it's the same bones, but Warp Crawl got a little fat as it went on. I think mostly because it was living a sedentary writer lifestyle. It wants you to write down those captain's logs, because to me, that's a big part of what starship fiction is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like that's a it's
Um,
an interesting take on I think you can get a similar effect if you turn the lens to quest crawl and treat it like you're a bard writing down the legend of Jacob in this
oh,
case,
that's
or,
cool.
or whatever. It
I
got
like
me
that a lot.
thinking about kind of the other ways to kind of canonize, because I feel like one of the probably the coolest things about warp crawl and then quest crawl, I think the digital version that we had made and played in Roll20, was kind of the artifact that gets left over,
Mhm.
is kind of this really
Yeah.
interesting amalgam of ideas stitched together with this kind of narrative through line.
Well, one of the things I think is really cool about Warp Crawl is that in a lot of ways it's a marriage between what I find interesting about solo RPGs
Mhm.
and what I find interesting about table RPGs, because or I don't know what you want to call them, group RPGs, regular RPGs, you solo nerds.
Yeah.
Um, I really like solo RPGs because you do get those artifacts, right? Like there's that creative writing component to it, and I love looking back at our early Warp Crawl play tests and just the insane logs we came up with, like the 4 or 5 of us who were playing, like, that's fucking awesome. But I also don't like being alone with my own thoughts. So I
That's
don't know
fair.
that solo RPGs are necessarily for me. So I like that it was a way to write and, to write a story, not just to tell a story, but to write a story, to make an artifact with your friends, I think is something that, yeah, more solo RPGs should be for 3 to 5 players, I think.
Ironically, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's kind
right?
of like well, and that's like the other part of it is it's not really a solo RPG. I think Warp Crawl definitely is. In fact, it's like 3 to 5 players.
You could hack it easily enough, I think, but yeah, I think we
You
we settled on we
could,
debated adding a whole bunch of, like, if 2 players, then type of rules, but ultimately we decided, if anybody wants to play that way, we'll figure it out.
right? But I think the most important aspect of that is that it's GM-less, right? Which is
Yes.
like it's kind of implied in a solo RPG that it's GM-less, that you're the GM and the player. Whereas Warp Crawl and Quest Crawl and Waste Crawl and kind of all the crawlers that we've built, they don't really ever say like you are the GM and the player. We kind of say like don't worry about the GM. Like
Yes.
adjudication is everybody's responsibility. You're responsible for your own turn tracking and resource management and resolution tracking. All that stuff is yours on your turn. Whatever, keeping your logs. That's part of your responsibility, which I think
Yeah.
in a lot of ways flies in the face of kind of how RPGs are traditionally played, and I think maybe come as a surprise to people who have historically been players in RPGs. That all of a sudden
Mhm.
you're playing an RPG that kind of has an expectation of you that you just don't have in 5e. With D&D Beyond, you barely have to keep track of anything, and if you don't, it's kind of on the DM for not, managing your crap for you. And that's interesting. So, like, I don't know, like, that was definitely not the way it was when I was growing up with RPGs. Like, you were expected to kind of manage your own stuff and,
Mhm.
draw your own maps and you
Yeah,
kept your own ammunition and
got
you
your
knew,
conditions.
yeah, you knew how much stuff you had, you knew how much oil you had, and you were responsible for managing that. And if you flubbed
Mhm.
it, that was like bad. You didn't,
Yeah.
if you were ever audited, which is kind of a silly idea, but I think it is a thing. Like you can be audited in D&D somehow, which is so fucking weird. Like no other
Yeah.
game.
No other game. "What do you wanna do for fun today?" "I'm gonna get audited."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's something at play there where when you set one person up as like the rules master, like
Right.
then you kind of end up in a situation where when you're looking at your character sheet and you realize, oh my torch should have burnt out an hour ago, or I've been out of rations for 5 days or whatever, right? It kind of puts you in a position where you're like, I'm getting away with something. I haven't been caught. Like,
Yeah.
whereas I think just saying like, okay, like we're all grown adults playing a game. Please keep track of your own provisions. Kind of like, it's. it's funny just how when you treat people like children, I think they very instinctively act that way. When you treat them like adults, they're very like, "Oh, yeah, I can do math, like, I'll keep my little
Yeah,
tally."
I'll do the basics.
Um, yeah, right. I really love too in Warp Crawl, I of all of the, like, when I'm writing and stuff, I feel like it always there's just ends up with a lot of asides, and then I try and claw them back so it's a readable, usable document.
Hmm.
But I do really like that we got to keep the little "This is set in the future, there's no more hierarchy, work together as adults of common purpose and goodwill." Like,
Well, and
I think
that was a really unique decision that we had to make because we kind of decided early on that we didn't want any one player to play the role of captain, as that would kind of imply like you're the GM, you're the adjudicator, you're the person
yeah,
who's kind of handling it. And I really like the idea that like nobody is the captain, that everybody's kind of responsible to the ship. And, it's like
yeah,
almost like you have an AI captain who's like, yeah, I know what the mission is. I'm going to go do this stuff. And it's all of you maintaining the ship, the operations of the ship that make sure that, the missions get done and stuff.
yeah. I
Although
mean,
ultimately, I think in the way that the game is played, I think like each doesn't each person decide where the ship is moving like in the next round. It's played around the
yeah,
table. So there's kind of like a little bit of that, like I don't know how to describe it. It definitely has happened in Westcrawl as well, where like one person's idea of where to go next does not jive with another person's idea of where to go next, and the surprise, head east,
detour.
yeah,
Yeah,
surprise detour to the to the good lands. I think it's a fun and interesting thing that is, yet again, is missing from you almost never hit that in a standard role playing game, because you kind of have the conversation and the power never really transfers around the table, right? Like
yeah,
ultimately the party's going to go kind of where the loudest person wants it to go, and then
yes,
if people don't like that, it's like, well, suck it up. Versus in quest crawling and the crawlers, like if somebody wants to go somewhere, the party's going there if it's their turn. And if that's not on everybody's agenda, sorry, that's adventuring. Like, everybody's kind of got their moment to really drive the boat. I think that's such
yeah,
a cool it creates like an interesting level of drama that I don't think I've ever really seen anywhere else, because you can't stay mad about it. You kind of just live with it, but it does create this kind of horse trading for like, well,
yeah,
if we go here and then we go there, and sometimes it all just pats out and it's like, okay, everybody, we're heading the way we want to head. But anyway,
yeah.
I always thought that was a really
Well,
cool ad thing.
feel like what usually happens in those games is you all have a discussion about what you want to achieve, and then like the individual execution, people might have different ideas about how you're getting there, but
Hmm.
because you're all going to the same place, nobody's ever going to be like, ah, well, you drove us in the wrong. I mean, every once in a while you'll wander into a black hole and people will be like, Tyler, what are you doing? You're driving us, like, you're going to ruin us on the shores of this tidal event. But I that's all part of it too, right?
Yeah, no, and
um
I think that shit's great. Like, I just love the
yeah,
idea that, oh no, you pulled us into a gravity well. The party has to come together and deal with it, right? So
yeah,
you're gonna react to the adventure that has arisen, and like, is there a bunch of room there for blame? Well, you can't jettison your, you
yeah,
can't
right.
space your dude. Like, it doesn't matter. Um,
um,
but we've also
I think
played. I think another interesting thing about this is that, like, because the rules for quest crawl, warp crawl, ways crawl are so kind of like they're simple at their heart, there's a lot of variants that we've played just while
yeah,
playtesting, because it was like, oh, it was convenient to try out a bunch of different things. Like, oh, we've played a competitive quest crawl where we had like multiple
yeah.
parties going around and doing
It's
stuff.
I'm a big fan of splitting the party in quest crawl. The rules don't explicitly support it, but there's nothing in the rule book that says you can't do it. So
Right.
if you're playing quest crawl out there,
All
feel
it
free to
says
break
is,
up.
I think all it says is that uh, people moving together share a party token. And like, if you want to not be in that party, there's nothing saying there can't be more than one party token on the board for sure.
Yeah.
Such an interesting thing.
All right.
Yeah. So where were we? We were talking about what warp crawl,
Yeah.
and we'd gone about how it's headless, so there's no hierarchy, but there's roles.
Yeah.
And I think that's unique. We hadn't done that before. And character creation kind of has a different flavor to it with the insertion of roles, not the least of which is that the role you're in defines the logs that you enter. Right? It's the jobs that you do and then the logs that you enter. What do you think, like, do you think that list is like complete? Do you think there's room on that list? For
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it was very like, as we realized there would be more, kind of like bookkeeping that normally a GM would handle, it became more necessary to distribute that among those, 6 roles or whatever. Uh, so I think if you were going to expand the rules of the game, you'd probably want some more stuff there. But I kind of like the way it works right now, where it's like, if you're, I'm trying to think of, like certain roles have more talking to do. So if you're not a big fan of, like, you don't want to be taking the notes during the game, there are roles that are very much like, you just have to check the box every turn. Like, that's your job, is to check that box.
Right. Right.
Um,
Like
yeah,
security versus counselor.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Right. Like if you're playing counselor, you're doing a lot of, every time you meet a peaceful planet, you're going to be writing it down, right?
Right.
So it's definitely something for somebody who, doesn't mind doing a bit of typing during the game.
Right.
Whereas if you're playing with kids, you might want to give them easier roles like engineer, for example, or something like that.
Totally. And while I think what was interesting about this too is that the decision to do this again kind of came out of the statefulness of the world. Like the warp cluster itself is this
Hmm.
collection of systems or whatever, but like the fact that a system could be friendly or hostile, but also sits on this axis of it's a primitive world, it's a pure world, or it's an advanced world, or it's a super intelligence, whatever. Uh, that you kind of have this other axis of it's something that I think would port nicely again over to quest crawl. If you really wanted to play like the kingdoms kind of level of quest crawl, you could
Yeah.
get there. I think it's a really interesting aspect to add to this type of game.
Right. The Song of Ice and Fire quest crawl, you'll want the warp crawl faction rules for sure.
Right, exactly. And I think Warp Quest Crawl already has good faction kind of systems at its heart, right? The factions as kings, and that exists in Warp Crawl as well. Although the factions are kind of different in a sense, like they're more like peer factions, and there's an assumed faction that your ship is part
Yeah.
of. I wonder if there's even space there for the fiction of what your faction comes from. I think there's a certain amount of like, oh, it's some Terran
Yeah.
Earth based system that you're coming from, but that would be a fun narrative pen to wiggle around and go, okay, well, what if it's alien? What if we're
Mhm.
aliens? And
Yeah.
we're the ones traveling through, or what if we're AI? And we're some systems cleanser or something. I've just been watching The Expanse,
Oh
and
yeah.
so it's like right on my mind, like what how does this fit with all this other stuff? Another
I
thing,
love those books.
the books, yeah. I have
Yeah.
not read any of the books,
I haven't
but
seen the show.
I need to get the RPG. Apparently, there's a TTRPG
Oh.
for The Expanse. James Semple wrote one of the like some expansion book for it with a friend of his.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah, but I wanted to talk real quickly about the tech. It's like there's kind of a
Yeah.
so like in the predecessor in Quest Crawl, coming up with the basic item list and the magic item list, you can tell, like, kind of looking at it, that the world as designed and the items as designed fit super nicely together. They're very snug. I don't feel like that's necessarily the case in Warp Crawl. It feels like there's a little bit more like the fiction came first, and then we kind of got it to work with the world building, and I kind of like that. Like, I actually think that makes it like a little bit more fitting. One of my favorite things is the decoy. Having a decoy ship that you can kind of jettison to let the hostile aliens think that you've been destroyed and get away. And like, that's something that I don't think I would have immediately thought of as, like, given the rules of the game, how it's structured, I wouldn't have come to that as like, oh, well, this is something. But I think as a fiction, having again just watched Expanse, you see them do this crap all the time, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, well, we jettison some part of our shuttle, looks like debris. How powerful are your scanners? How much data can you collect at 200,000 kilometers?
But yeah, to answer or to respond to what you're saying, um, that the first episode of Firefly, when Wash jettisons that little decoy, "Cry Baby Cry," that's one of my all-time favorite science fiction scenes. Those little scrappy scavengers have a coffee can with a radio in it. They shoot out to distract the gigantic ship that could crush them.
Totally.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. For people, if people are watching this and they haven't played Warp Crawl, one of the things that kind of makes it different than Quest Crawl and Waste Crawl, in Quest Crawl and Waste Crawl, your supplies, your provisions, you're consuming one every turn because you are a person who needs to eat, and if you get injured, you might consume more. Whereas in Warp Crawl, your amount of energy you're draining, your amount of supply you're draining is purely dependent on the amount of tech you have. And I really, really like that we did that because it sets up a situation where, um, how to say this, like, if you can be loaded for combat, like, you can be loaded for bear if you're not going very far. But if you're exploring the distant reaches of the warp cluster, you have to travel a little bit lighter, and that kind of inherently increases the difficulty as you move outwards, which, not to be too self-congratulatory, but, like, I thought that was a really, really I love those things in these games, those tidy little simple things that have complicating effects that kind of play out naturally.
It feels like a force of nature. It's like a
Yeah.
force of the natural order of things that, like, if you're going to go traveling out there, you've got to travel light enough to get there and back on the fuel supply that you have. It's just like how when water freezes, ice rises to the top and floats on water and then melts, to the heat because it's closer to the, like, I don't know. Good design. Good design. And then going into the special tech. So, well, I guess, so I was just talking about the basic tech stuff that we've got. So this has got this great set of basic tech. Hard light shields, obvious, but really cool. Scanners.
Classic.
Artificial crewmate, which, fantastic opportunity there. Gravity engine.
One of my favorite playtest memories of that is your or I guess our guys. I know, as I wasn't GMing, I was playing.
Yeah.
We get so wrapped up in the GM language, but, like, oh God, our poor, what was his name? Disposable Dan or something? We had just one automated crewman, and I think it was like Dan the Fourth was, like, with us by the end of the
because we had kept jettisoning.
Yeah, we had kind of, like, there were a couple situations where it's like, "I'm sorry, Dan, but it's either it's you or us." Like,
yeah, I think he went down. He went down with the ship, right, as we escape podded a few times, and, like, each time Dan was kind of like, well, he's just part of the ship. Like, he goes down with the ship. I love that idea too, though, that we're kind of like, you're the artificial crewmate. You're part of the technology here. Sorry, Doctor.
Enjoy philosophizing on this barren moon.
Totally. But then, okay, so we've got the gravity engine. This is actually one that I think is really unique to the game and how we wrote it. But it's pretty wild. Like, what is it? It's like bonus on black holes. So this is how to get out of a black hole.
Yeah.
Bonus on crisis alert for spades, which is, I think, what is it? It's like a mass shear.
Yeah, something like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the thing with like the finding ways to recontext, because there are certain bonuses that you need. Like
right.
if you're gonna have a hard lands, if you're gonna have a black hole, you need that compass thing or whatever it is. But I like that we did the sledge engine. I think, do we end up calling it the sledge engine or?
So that is in, I think, the high tech, the
Yeah, it
sledge
is.
drive. So this, okay, yeah. So this is kind of crazy. So like the gravity engine, one of the things I love about this idea is that we're like, okay, gravity engine, it does some really simple stuff. But we had hit problems with quest crawl, and I think this has been called out a few times by people who play quest crawl quite a bit. Is like, if you don't have the compass or you break your compass and you don't have a suit, get fucked, kid. You're dead. You're just gonna die
Yeah.
in that wasteland. And of course, we've house ruled around that to like, the number comes down every round,
I
or
fucking like that hard mode for life, guys. If you're
oh,
out there playing quest crawl, die in those hard lands.
that's
I
how I
demand
died
it.
today. I died in a swamp. Yeah, swampy hardlands. Walked in there, had a compass, broke it, died, lost to the swamp. It was great. But the gravity engine in this case, because we were like, well, it kind of happened like a little too frequently, and it didn't really have, I think, a good
There's no
solution.
suit.
Like, you don't get the bonus for your suit, so like
Yeah.
just because you're suited, like all of a sudden the gravity wells became really problematic. With this, if it breaks, it kicks you out in a direction, some number of like cards,
Yeah.
basically.
You can get lost in space.
Yeah, you just get flung wildly into space when your gravity engine breaks. I just love that fantasy, that the notion of that. We got the photonic cannons, the nuclear torpedoes, armored hull, magnetic tractor, so tractor beam, hollow amenities, which I love that's one of our core.
Gotta have it.
Gotta have it.
I
Um,
really wanted to do a whole. I'm not even sure. I don't think it made it into the final rules, but there was at one point a thing where if your holodeck, your hollow amenities broke, you had to roll on the adventure table to have a holodeck episode. Like it was like, don't let your holodeck malfunction, or you'll get fucking, you'll have to deal with Barclay or whatever.
hold on. Bonus on friendly alien world crew challenges. If this tech breaks, play a holographic
Yeah,
away mission. Treat this as a adventure away mission set entirely with hollow amenity program. Gain no tech, supplies, or ore from successes in plan and execution, and skip the debriefing entirely. Someone outside hollow amenities finally shuts the homicidal program off.
full of
Um,
datas, baby.
yeah, so yeah, you kind of get so much access to so many different cool moments of fiction in this. And then of course with the decoy, like we talked about, and escape pods, which foregone conclusion that you would have those. But again, that's just the basic tech. That's the stuff you can roll out of the ship. You can roll out of the shipyard with, and then
Mhm.
we've got the high tech. And I love how each one of these is super flavorful too, but in a way that I don't think is expected. Like cloaking device, okay, sure. From a Star Trek perspective, Romulans and Klingons had it. Federation didn't for a long time. Matter replicator, that's a Federation tech, right? So spatial compressor is interesting, but it's kind of like almost like you think about like a Borg tech, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, we can just pack all this crap into this space and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I'm gonna reveal myself as a lover of probably literally the worst movie of the 2000s. You ever seen Ultraviolet?
oh yeah, yeah.
It is beyond bad. It's so terrible, and I convinced a busload of people to see it with me. So
Hold
no
on,
shame
Mia
is
Mia
okay.
Jovovich, Ultraviolet, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was not a
But the
bad
hammer.
movie.
Oh, you should rewatch it, my friend. It is insanely awful.
Okay,
But I love it. It's one of my it's a guilty pleasure movie for sure. And I just love the when they pull that stuff out of Hammer space, that kind of like spatial compression tech, I think is so cool and just fun to imagine, and it can lead to great fiction, and I think it's great.
yeah, yeah. Um, and okay, and then we've got the sledge drive. Now this one, I think, was when you first rolled this out, I was like, what the is going on here? Like, this is crazy. And the idea here is that you get a bonus on shattered sectors, which means
Yeah,
if a sector has been destroyed and you're basically flying through a debris field, you're gonna do a little bit better. Um,
yeah. You've
but
got the
once
cow
per
plow.
turn, before you can move, you can take damage to your ship to move the ship's current sector into an adjacent empty space. So you can literally move space.
Yeah,
Let's talk about this. What does this mean?
sure. Uh, yeah. I mean, I think I just like what is it called? The Abramovich drive. It's one of those hypothetical FTL engines that, like, they say it's like you take a pocket of space and then you move that pocket of space faster than light, so no mass has to break the light speed barrier.
Right.
And I think that's just such a cool idea. And I really like the idea of just transporting a whole. I think it's not just star systems in this game. It's like clusters of star systems in each of these sectors. I think.
We've been
Yeah,
pretty
right.
ambiguous about it. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's a little loose, but like that's my headcanon. I just love the idea that you can like bump around these things, and for certain end games, like the Crystal Entity end game, you have to. You have to kind of use that sledge drive to construct little hallways that you can like force it into, and like
And then
you
break it
know,
away from
yeah,
connected reality.
and set it off in its own little pocket dimension.
Yeah.
Um,
So cool.
but yeah, I mean, like when we started playing Quest Crawl originally, like my favorite thing in Quest Crawl probably is the Twisting Pyramid,
Right.
where you can rotate the cards around the Twisting Pyramid to change the landscape, which I love. But it's a little hard to justify in a fantasy setting. Like at one point, we were working on a four elements version of Quest Crawl. You'll recall, and there was like an Earth artifact that was kind of like an early version of the Sledge Drive, and I really really liked that.
Yeah.
But when we started Warp Crawl and we knew we had a little bit extra space, I really wanted to commit to finding as many ways as possible to let the players alter the map, because I think that's one of the things in this game or in these games that really excites me. Is I love that feeling of you are changing the world, right? Like you're
Totally.
changing the game environment.
Totally.
Um,
I agree.
so
Yeah.
we yeah,
Sledge Drive was a
try to do
good
as much as that as we could.
Yeah, Sledge Drive was a good solution for that. And then the other two are the empathy enhancer, which I
Mm.
think you get from the World Mind, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And then the Gate Maker Drive, which is
Yeah,
again one of my favorites. Although I guess it's really it's very much similar to but adjacent to what the dwarves offer.
yeah, the
Um,
mountain passport in Quest Crawl.
yeah. Anyway, and then there's special text. So I guess this would be like the artifacts in Quest Crawl, and in Warp Crawl there's only two artifacts: the Terraformer and returning from Quest Crawl the Orb of Chaos.
Yeah,
Uh,
I love that one.
which I think is such a funny thing. 'Cause, like, I don't know that I like how many times in during playtest. How many times do you think the Orb of Chaos got used?
Once,
Once,
one single time.
one
Yeah,
single time. And how did it go?
yeah, and in fact, it was a Quest Crawl playtest. It wasn't even a Warp Crawl playtest.
Yeah,
I think it was kind of it's one of those things of like it's chaotic, it basically sets you back to square one in a lot of ways. It's kind of, I like the idea of giving one player the option to really fuck things up for everybody else. I like, the kind of like the big glowing red, don't press this button kind of button, I
yeah,
feel like is a lot of fun. And even if you never use the Orb of Chaos, just knowing that it's there, I feel like is kind of its own little treat.
yeah,
Um, I know when we play like Jack, who plays in our Pixels and Pagans game, is a pathological button pusher. Like, if you put something in front of him, it's like don't fuck with it, don't do it. They're gonna be like, oh, no, I'm gonna do it.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
so Jack. That's 100% true.
And yeah, I like that we got to include something like that in this game. And yeah, probably most groups are gonna look at it, get excited, and then realize that using it will fuck them up so bad. But every once in a while, I hope some like 11-year-old punk is going to play this game, realize that they're about to win and the game's going to be over, and be like, you know what? to blow the whole thing up.
But I mean, all it means is you start over again. But you have the stuff that you have, so you're actually and
Mhm.
theoretically, like realistically, that's kind of the only way to do certain things in. I know at least in Quest Crawl, like if you want to have the tunnel passport and the ancient knowledge, the only way to
Ah,
do that is to reset the world and then go back
yeah,
through
yeah.
and pick the other faction, right? So
Interesting.
yeah, there's some completionist crap that
Yeah.
I've definitely nerded out about.
This is kind of not really relevant to what we're talking about right now, but just like one of the things I really like about all of these games is I feel like as we've played them, like there's a learning curve on these games, and when you start realizing how to beat them, I like that little like what do you call it? Once you said that little ding of like now I understand the system is kind of there's
the
it's
the epiphany of mastery is a big deal with these games. I feel like the first
yeah
couple of times you play, you're likely to feel a little off footed, not really get like it's there's kind of
dangerous out there.
it's dangerous out there, and there's like tracking what's going on, record keeping that is not again. It's kind of hard. It's not like you just roll the dice and everything sorts itself out. Like when an encounter is done and it happens pretty fast, you're gonna tick your little thing and do your little bip, and then it's the end of the day and you're ticking your little thing. It's not like in D&D where after an hour of combat, okay, now you guys rest for the night or whatever, tick your resources. This is like really fast. That things get moving through, and yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. The whole thing,
Well, I think you're
once you see the loop and the outer loop of making decision making at that higher level, where you're like, oh, you know what? Let's backtrack here to do a loop of resource gain so we can
mhm.
ensure we get the treasure to unlock this thing over here. And like you start kind of playing the meta of the game and understanding how the game works at a meta level. It's so satisfying
Mhm.
in that same way that like the first time you kind of understand like how to beat those certain bosses in Zelda, or it's like that
Yeah.
kind of classic like video game with no instructions kind of feel.
Think one of the things about it a little bit is like in video games sometimes when you unlock those little things it can feel like you're cheesing the system a little bit, right? Or
Right.
that you lose immersion, like the strategy pulls you out. One of the things I really like about this game is that the strategy pulls you in. Like the more you start kind of really analyzing the terrain and thinking about where you're going and trying to make decisions as a group, even if you're not doing character voices or wearing funny hats, you are role playing. You are thinking in world and you're reacting on the logic of the world. And I don't know, I think that's cool.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Um, like I remember, um, I think it was one of the first games that you played of Quest Crawl when we were all kind of hanging out, and I was really excited to show you what I had gotten so far. And like we got into a conversation at one point where we were like, oh, like do we risk these beasties or like do we want to go talk to the dwarves or like, and it occurred to me, it was like, if we were four fantasy adventurers sitting on a hilly goodlands foraging and talking about our next move, this is the exact fucking conversation our characters would be having. There's no separation
Right.
between our strategy talk and how our players would be strategizing, how they're going to conquer this, vast landscape.
Yeah. Or what their
Uh,
next move is. Do we go and ask the dwarves for help? I hear they have enchanted armor there. It's like one of the cool things about it too is like because the rules are known to everyone, it's like they're hyper transparent. So like everybody can look at the map that's exposed and see what they want, right?
mhm.
But they have full access to the information that's in that map. So it's really kind of like if my goal is to try and go, hunt down that mega beast and get that weapon of legend for myself, like I can be the one pushing for us getting into the elves and getting that elven cloak and hightailing it down here.
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody else is like, I just want that treasure, I want to go get that vault, then their whole cycle is going to be about spinning down the greater evil and like doing this whole thing. Anyway, crazy cool stuff. But now there's additions. So Warp Crawl, I think, brings a lot to what Quest Crawl's foundations are. And one of the things that we added was orders, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like in a coming future iteration of Quest Crawl, this is almost analogous to what I would say is like side quests or quests.
Yeah.
Kind of above and beyond what the original quest, like original Quest Crawl, your queen is your quest, you say what it is, and when it's done, it's done. I think the idea is that we're going to add side quests, and it's kind of built off of the same, a simple idea of like your home world wants you to go and do stuff, like that you're on a mission to go do stuff,
Yeah.
and you roll for what that is. And there's some pretty cool evocative stuff here, but like some of this stuff is pretty challenging. Like deep space, you got to flip a sector at least 4 spaces from the home world. So that's that kind of deep travel, getting out there.
Yep.
Truce, remove a hostile token from an alien world. That's good. Peace Summit, add a friendly token to an alien world. So actually take a neutral world to peaceful or to friendly. Discover a new world, unknown signal. You got asteroid minings. The first one's bring 40 ore home. And then the hardest one, I think, is technological leap. You bring a high tech to the home world. And when you bring that high tech to the home world, it becomes, I think the scientists can load it on as a basic tech.
Yeah.
You can offload it to them and then rebuy it back or reload it back on later, assuming that they don't break it, right? So there's like a roll.
Yeah. They have a chance to reverse engineer the alien technology, or they could just fuck it up, and then you're like, you nerds, you science guys. Like,
now we need to go find another civilization with
yeah,
cloaking here.
gotta go knock over some other unsuspecting aliens.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting because, like, I mean, obviously, Quest Crawl came out in what, like August? Jesus Christ, August 2022? Is that all? Seems like longer ago. But even before that, like you and I feel like last 2 years almost, I've really been on a hex crawl kick. I've been a little obsessed with hex crawls. Our Lamentations game is a hex crawl.
They're so much
I'm working on
fun.
a Troika hex crawl right now. They're awesome. I love them. I don't want to play other kinds of D&D. I just want my hexes. But
Black Marshes.
one of the
Actually.
things, yeah, nice. One of the things I've really learned about exploration-based games is that you have to, like, whatever you find in a hex should send you out to another hex. And in D&D, I try and make it so that there's at least 2 adventure hooks in every dungeon. Often players will not find either one, but that's fine because hopefully they found 2 in the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Every location you find should spit you back out towards another location, and I really do think that kind of like putting quest hooks in the game, spitting people back out from the town to go and do orders, or going and hitting the elves, and now you have to go kill the dwarves, or finding the vault and realizing you need the key, or you find the second town in Quest Crawl, you need to go beat up the pirate town, the town of thieves, in order to unlock the second town. All that stuff I feel like is what it makes the game world feel alive. It keeps you moving. It makes the game dynamic and interesting.
And I think you can. Yeah. I think you can do a lot of adding to that too, right? Like this is kind of the idea at the heart of the side quests that we want to do. Is like you go to the elves, and they don't just give you the quest to defeat the dwarves. They give you the quest to like go pull the magic sword from the overgrown grove in the 8 forest. And you got to go find the 8 Hardlands forest, get lost in there in the overgrown grove, and like pull that sword. But you wouldn't get that sword if you just went to the 8 overly. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea that the reward and the quest are bound up together and tell a story and go above and beyond. I really love that.
We've been talking a lot about doing the advanced quest crawl with like tarot cards or similar, and I do really like the idea. Like at one point, I think we had the magician set up where it was like that's like the magic school, and if you want to learn spells, you go to this guy. He sends you on a quest out to go do whatever, and if you get back, then you get a special, you unlock a little spell or something. One of which it's got to be the sledge drive effect. We got to get that Earth Mover effect into advanced quest crawls somehow. I think it's.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think the end result of this process of developing advanced quest crawl, I'm super looking forward to seeing what that basic items list looks like, that magic item list, that artifact list, because while the principles of the game are simple, the ways that you come up with to manipulate them, like the first time we rotated cards around the pyramid, my mind was blown, man. It was so cool. And yeah, like it's funny that like it's just a deck of cards. It's relatively straightforward. And yet somehow there's something to what we've done here that like it kind of opens up a whole world of imagination of what you can create in terms of rules and stuff. And I remember having that feeling immediately. Like as soon as we started playing Quest Crawl, I was like, oh man, it'd be so cool if this was like this, and you could imagine doing this and this, and like, oh, yeah. Like
I just want to say, if you're sitting at home playing Quest Crawl, please, for the love of God, pop the hood, make some home rules. It's so much fun to get greasy with, like just, and especially with Warp Crawl, because it is a more complex system. Like, we did our best to provide, a structure. But if, there's room still. Like if you get inspired and you decide you want to come up with, bits for it, do.
And I think one of the cool ideas, and you just said it right, is grab a tarot deck. If you want to go farther, grab a tarot deck and add those extra. What is it? It's like 30 cards you get, right? 26. From well, it's 22, right? 26. Okay, so 26 cards you get. Yeah, flop those in there and start having some fun coming up with what these extra cards mean.
At the very least, I think we should release some rules for the knights. So we should just do that as a blog post. And you can just use the minor arcana, but we had some really great. There was a chaos. The knights were champions, as I recall, in the notes we had brewing for Advanced Quest Crawl.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of them was like a chaos beast, where it was like you would roll a die to find out how challenging the chaos beast was at any time. One of them was like, a bridge troll, or like, yeah, that kind of stuff. I feel like making those little alterations to the world, I think, can be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, if we're making blog post content, I think, the alternate for the elves, right? And making the spades the orcs, or making the hearts, the religious faction, or, just going nuts with like doing different, you could do completely different fantasy types and tropes within those kind of columned, suit types, and have a lot of fun. You could get really wild with it.
One of the things you said a lot about Quest Crawl was that you liked the idea of using it to build a campaign world for a more traditional TTRPG game. And I feel like with Warp Crawl, because you're making the log and stuff, if you want a good way to team world build a sci-fi setting, Warp Crawl's got you covered. Like
that's absolutely true, actually, for sure. I think the most interesting part about that is that you would end up with your warp cluster map. You've got a great like kind of selection of aliens that you define, that you and your world builder party define. You've got a bunch of logs from all those interactions of how this one group of explorers kind of interacted with it. And then I think one of the cool things that I really like about the way that you've approached these in general is that like those high level concepts, like the factions largely, they're kind of evergreen. They basically work no matter what. You're like, okay, the gate makers, these are the people who support transportation around the galaxy, around the warp cluster. Like, they've got that tech, they've got that shit on lock, and they're the ones you've got to go through if you want to go faster than you're currently capable of going, and going to places you haven't been before. And the same is true of the archdukes, right? The what are they called? The war dukes of the ringed worlds. Is again the weapons manufacturers, these guys whose entire thing is, controlling the commerce and flow of weapons throughout, and like it doesn't have to be one faction. You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't even have to be one idea. Like, you could have a number of civilizations that are filling this role in your world, however you want to describe that. But the idea that you have to interact with one of these to kind of get that working within the world, I think it's kind of it's an evergreen idea. Same thing with the world mind, where you've got kind of a hive mind, alien archetype out there, and you might have, again, many of them. The unearthed evil, of course, being our evergreen threat in the cosmos.
There's always something bad. There's gonna be something bad out there.
Well, and I like that it hasn't changed. The fantasy medieval milieu is always at threat from the unearthed evil, and you go as far into the future as you want, and that unearthed evil is still there, threatening to the black
catch a yar.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I really like that we got to do those little like quotes in Warp Crawl, those little snippets of like world building fantasy stuff. I always love stuff like that. But like, to keep it, it's like I wanted it to be specific enough to like give a vibe, but also like, if you want this to be, Star Trek the game, like, it doesn't, you could. I trust you to figure that out.
Yep.
It's not going to take, or if you want it to be the Expanse, like, what is it called? The proto-molecule? Is that what they call it in the Expanse? The little, would make an amazing D&D villain, I think.
Oh, yeah. That's it is called the proto-molecule. Although, ironically, I think the proto-molecule is kind of like it's not like an intelligence. Kind of a leftover, like an artifact that is like looking for its intelligence. It's like, where are the people who made me? I'm loving watching that show, because it's like, you're very much in the dark as to what is actually happening, but you're watching humans.
You don't want to spoil anything.
But you're just watching humans react poorly to things they don't understand, and then fight over it. And it's so just great. It's great drama and storytelling for that reason alone. I think what's interesting about Warp Crawl is it has that same vibe. When you run into that unearthed evil, and you see the impact it's having on the warp cluster, because the warp cluster is affected by the position of the unearthed evil, same as in Quest Crawl. Like, the world begins to... Sorry, go ahead.
You might be induced to use your sledge drive or a twisting pyramid to move stuff away from the unearthed evil to keep it safe.
Right. Or you're going to end up at war with somebody because you're going to have to bring tac nukes. Like, there's not a solution that doesn't involve you pissing off somebody. And I like that faction play really has a heart in Warp Crawl. Now, I don't want to spend too much time belaboring any other of the fine points of this amazing game that you brought to us, and thank you for writing it. I wanted to echo your thing. The fiction chunks in here are some of my favorite writing.
Hey, thank you.
I want to read some, but what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like, you and I have been at this as partners for a while now, and I think more than anything we've done, like, I think I ended up being sole credited writer on this, but I think you and Alicia, I think part of what made this thing great was that all of us came to the table with some really strong ideas about what science fiction should be and is and could be. And, this is definitely more than anything we've done. I think this is all of our baby together. Like,
well, that's 100% true. Like, even just by virtue of the fact of, like, Alicia put blood, sweat, and tears into getting the layout for this to where it is, which, in terms of our work, it's one of the strongest layouts we've ever done. I think it's one of the stronger in the space. Just looking at the layout and the design and how everything comes together. The visual art, while I understand it's generated by Midjourney, this was all very heavily curated and created, like I worked my ass off to get these images great, and we went over iteration after iteration to get them to tell the story we wanted to tell.
I feel like we're deep enough in this podcast. Do you mind if I just talk about AI art for a second now that nobody listening at this point, I think, is going to object too much to hearing my opinions on this? I know it's a contentious subject, but like I feel like we keep hearing people being like, oh, like AI art is theft. AI art is... Dude, property is theft, motherfucker. Like, it's, like intellectual property, intellectual theft. Like, this technology allows small producers like us to compete in terms of like graphical quality and layout quality. This book looks fucking better than anything WotC's put out in years. Like, it's a nice looking little book.
I don't know about that.
It is good. No, I don't. In terms of layout, I mean, I'll take this any day. I think it looks awesome. And, the reason we could do it is because of this technology. And yeah, we could have hired a guy and said, hey, draw us a starship that looks a little, Star Trek, a little Flash Gordon, but not too much of either, so we don't get sued. Like, we could have done that. But that guy would have just looked at a bunch of reference images and collated them into, a generic starship. So, it's not like we're trying to communicate great intensity of feeling or artistic achievement. This is illustration in a book, and I think a fucking futuristic space computer did it. That's so much the better, like all the art is public domain in this book. Like, that's fucking badass.
That's
true. Like, yeah, I understand, like, it sucks that we have to pay our rent and pay for food, and when will I be able to walk into a store and buy what I need with my good looks? And fuck, I get that, man. And I don't want to put anybody out of a job by using a computer to replace them. You know me, I'm a Luddite all the way. But like,
well, you were the first one replaced, right? Yeah. ChatGPT took your job before it even existed.
But like, I mean, I think that AI art is damaging in the context of capitalism. But if you just want to like make cool stuff and play fun games and show your friends neat ideas you had, AI art rocks. And I think it's great.
Yeah. And I think if you go across the landscape of people who are at the table trying to provide an experience with their friends, they will across the board say AI art is great, top notch, it works for us, let's use it. The problem is when you charge any money for a book, you get and it honestly, the people who are, again, trying to bring an experience to their table with their friends, they really don't care. It's the people who are also trying to create stuff, who are artists, largely. They're offended by it, and I get it. It makes sense. Again, there's some value to the idea that all the art in this is go nuts, so you can reuse it. It's not, we don't copyright it, we don't own it. We are very transparent about its use and where it came from. But I think, you said, like, we could have gone to an artist and, hired him to do all this. And the reality is, no, we couldn't have. As small press, independent publishers, there is not a single product we've made, save QuestCrawl, that has paid for itself. Just in terms of writing. Like, and QuestCrawl only paid for itself because we used AI art. And in Ping,
hired somebody to do one image for it, one single image for QuestCrawl would have put it in the red.
Well, I did. So, I say it paid for itself. I did illustration for it that was not paid, right? But I paid you, the writer. I sadly underpaid you, the writer. I pay you more. But I think we've got that sorted out now. But like, this is kind of the world that is where we are, right? Is as an independent creator, if I want to create something and I want to be fair at all, then I'm going to go way into the red. And we are as a business, like, way in the red to have created stuff that is, I like to think compelling, fun, engaging. It's full of cool ideas. And this is across the board with all of our products. I think they're all, what's weird is I show it to people, and when they see it, they're like, wow, this is great. It's amazing. How did you make this? Right? This looks really high quality. This looks really professional. But making a high quality professional product does not mean you will have an audience. That's not how the internet works. That's not how any of this works. WotC could shit on a stick, and everybody would know how that smells.
Yeah.
But I cannot get 200 people to look at one of our products when it comes out. It's pulling teeth. And that's the world that the independent creator lives in right now.
Yeah.
So
I think it's really interesting because in a way we almost went in the wrong trajectory, right? Because like our early stuff, if you look at like I think Doom Desert has like almost $2,000 worth of art in it.
Oh,
like
it's more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, don't let me count pennies here, but like, there's a lot of fucking money in the illustrations for Doom Desert and Moon Elves and Divisible Man, and then we went from that to kind of single illustrations for 2-page dungeons because that's what was affordable. And then when we kind of when that kind of ran out, we started doing AI art, and maybe if we'd gone the other way, people would be like, "Wow, these guys are improving" or whatever. But like, I don't understand how you're supposed to like you say, like, our initial stuff we put out was so high production quality, and really I don't think there's a way to run a successsul TTRPG business like that. I don't think it can be done.
No, I think you're right, and that's true. Like, so that I think the thing is like you can't. What we did was we tried to make high quality products out of the gate, and I did that because I wanted to know how to do that. I wanted to see if I could, and I knew that was going to cost me money, so I spent the money, and that has resulted in I've got some relationships with some people who can provide some great art. I myself have become a better artist, more attuned to what I want out of art. And obviously it's fostered relationships with you as a writer and other writers. But the thing is like that first book, there was never a chance that it was going to get a huge audience.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
But the thing I never wanted to have happen was to have somebody come in now and go back and go, this is, like they just started getting this. You know what I mean? Like, I want them to go back and go like, oh, okay, they made an interesting decision. Whoa, what are these gems in their past? What are these cool idea books that are back here? And Doom Desert, Divisible Man, Moon Elves all, fit that idea. And the reality is, I want to go back through and redo those books. I want to come in and do the layout again, get them ready for print. Bring them to an audience again. What's that? You'd rewrite all of them. Well, and I think the plan is we may well, right? Because I think part of this process has been finding our audience. And the reality is right now, if I look at the numbers, is our audience a 5e adventure? No. We get better traction off of our Troika products, period. Because the Troika following, while it is small, is extremely loyal. And they're kind of underserved, and they get plenty of products, but they don't get a garbage load of products coming out for free every day, which is I think the problem. Is you look at 5e, you don't have to buy anything. You can just go download everything for free. And is it going to be garbage? Yeah, but what do you care? Like, you're getting free garbage. It's you don't have to pay for it. Congratulations. And I think that the thing is like, no matter what anyway, if you're going and you're looking into adventure modules or you're looking into this third-party content stuff, you're probably not going for the canon. You're not there for the lore, right? You're there for the couple of nuggets of really clever ideas in there that you didn't think of yourself. That you're like, oh, that's dope. I want Rockfort, the cheese golem, in my shit. Scrap the rest. Oh, the egg that hatches the future. That's a hilariously clever idea. The whispering harpies. It's such a weird thing that the saltwater saloon and the great hateful grateful dead sugar skull mariachis. Like there's so many cool ideas in just spread out throughout all of the work that we've done. And I think that was always kind of my intention, right? Was like to create something. And as I was talking about Horde of the North Horde of the Northwind with my friends Shane and Chelsea while I was down in Seattle for the Halloween party, and I was telling them about how it's a monastery, right, that a white dragon has come and wiped out and has made their horde in this monastery. But because they wiped out all the monks, the place is haunted with the spirits of these monks. And so you've got these, it's like, think of the ghosts as a faction. Think of the Yetis that live in the glacier out front as a faction. Think of the kobolds and the dragon as a faction. And they're all interacting. And the monk ghosts will haunt and possess the Yetis and the kobolds. And so when the party interacts with any one of those regular factions, they might be interacting with a ghost. That's really cool. I like it's a cool idea, and it like that's the kind of thing where I'm like, oh, okay, that's really clever. That's going in. That's what I want, is for this opportunity for a standard Yeti encounter to suddenly be not a standard Yeti encounter. Same thing with the kobolds. And then at the heart of all that, I want, okay, well, what if they actually go in and figure out and find the old religious texts of this monastery? Can I pull, the domain of generosity cleric out of this adventure such that it's a player option? Because I think that's another thing. You talked about, having the world impacted by player actions. And one of the things that I've always found cool, I really loved it in Dragonlance, was like the gods are coming back, right, where the players kind of first find one of the first avatars of the gods. And but what if that happened in the other direction? What if it was just a lost faith, that it was decimated 100 years ago, and the party now stumbles upon this, ruin where they found the ancient texts and the spirit of the High Holy from this, faith, and can now kind of start anew this whole new religious movement in a region. I just think that's such a cool tool to hand the players as an option. Yeah. So I don't know, not to get off too far on a tangent there, but you get what I'm saying. And like, we released another book this last week, Miss Quinn's Strange Sweets. Now, we had been working on this for a couple of years now, and I had purchased the original text, the writing for it, from Miguel Gonzalez back in 2021. He came hot out of the DM Dave course and was like, "Oh, I'm going to write this great adventure." And I read the synopsis, and I was like, "That sounds amazing. Why don't we work on it together? Give me what you have." And so I paid him for the writing, and I hired Maya for the art. And we had a long cycle on the art. She went and did it. She came back. We both were kind of unhappy with what we had gotten. She went and did it again, came back again, got the art ultimately that I really wanted for it, which is this kind of saccharine sweet. It looks like a children's book, but it's a D&D. It's so good.
You can really see how much she's developed since Doom Desert in the Miss Quinn stuff. I feel like.
Well, I follow her all the time. She's a Emily Carr over in Vancouver here, and her style has evolved, her talent has evolved, but she's always got this she's got this nugget of her-ness that I see in all of her art, and I really like Doom Desert as it stands. I think it's a piece complete in that, like, the art, it all touches that same stone. It matches in this really pristine way that's very Doom Desert. Whereas Miss Quinn's has its art, and it all looks like it's cut from that same, and it's like, it's the same art. And she's got a really good way of doing that, where she can, like, get the feel that she knows I want to get, and then hit all of that art on that same track, so it doesn't feel like any of the art's disjoined. Very talented. Maya Babineau, go check her out on, she's on Instagram, and, you see a bunch of her art.
Like to
in our books.
Artists have been Canadian. Almost all of them, really.
I think the only one who isn't is Jeremy. Jeremy Adams, I think, is U.S.
Jeremy Adams is also great.
He is great.
Go Canada.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did try. I was when I first started this, I was trying to, and I continue to try to make it an effort that can help bring Canadian publishers and producers into the marketplace. Now, I got to say, this marketplace is a weird one, and I don't know how much longer anything will be around. But we're going to keep trying. Like, I don't think we have any reason to slow down or stop. And in fact, I'm looking forward to us diving back into two-pagers over the next year. I'd really like to cram out another 12 two-pagers. And really, I really want to get our catalog of work over to Troika and really start releasing some high-quality, high-end books in the Troika space. I just started working with a local printer that can do the embossed fabric, hardcover. Yeah, the really, the tasty stuff.
Yeah, the tasty stuff.
Yeah. So I want to go through the process for that, at least one book, and see if we can get that kickstarted.
Do you mind if I take us off track here for a second? I know we're like off track. What? Have you seen Black Knights, Luke Gearing's new thing?
Black Knights.
Yeah, I think it's called Black Knights. It's like Luke Gearing did it with some other guy. It's just the two of them. It's like, geez, what even is it? It's like D6 backgrounds of these silly little knight weirdos, and like some quest hooks and some items, and it's just a little snack package, like it's just a little 16-page snack pack of funny little Troika drawings, some funny little Troika ideas, and boy, I just like it. It's one of those things you see and you're like, I want to do that. Like, I want to.
Yeah, these guys, man. Yeah, it's a problem. I envy them. They're so good.
Yeah.
They're so talented.
Yeah. And I think like there's I don't know. There's some stuff that like Acid Death Fantasy, also Luke Gearing, like is really, really fantastic in a lot of ways. Hard to get traction on in some others. Like I think if they had included a starter adventure, it would have been a much stronger book.
That's fair.
But like just in terms of like the that kind of like imaginative whimsy, that like psychedelic Pratchett shit, like I don't know, like Douglas Adams on acid kind of stuff, like like he fucking nails it. He's got the art's always good. Like I like his stuff a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not gonna lie. I have a feeling that a lot of the value in those, like, don't get me wrong, I think Gearing is awesome. His writing is amazing, but a lot of it is carried very heavily by the art. Like in terms of the vibe that you're getting and the artists that they're able to work with, or that they've been able to work with, like everybody from Daniel Sell, Millennium Arts Council, through Luke Gearing, and whoever's doing, basically the guys creating all these zines and stuff. Like, there's some cadre of artists who are like little zine weirdos that are fucking killing it. And I wish I had just an ounce of the talent that is in the pile of people to put into our own books. And maybe I do. Who knows? Like, I think at some level there needs to be like we need to like sit down in a room and not work separately. Like so far, a lot of our work has been you write in a vacuum, I take what you've written and take it to art, and we work out art externally, come back, work it into layout, refine, edit, refine, rewrites, re-arts. Okay, cool. Like ready for production. Let's go. But I think if like coming from a zine design perspective, I think the right way to do that is to come to the table early together and go, okay, like here's our page. I'm thinking big page. Monster over here. Let's talk about it. Like what's on this page? How are we going to present that in an impactful way? How are we going to tell that story visually and with the text? And how's that going to work together? So I think that's part of like a workflow process that we've never really dove into. I think we did a bunch of it when we did Quest Crawl. But that was because we kind of were again, super constrained, right? It was just like, it was a super tight loop.
Also, we were in the same city when Quest Crawl. We were making Quest Crawl, which I feel like has been an on again, off again road bump for us. So I've been lost in Mexico and cold places quite frequently.
Well, it hasn't hurt your writing, so.
Well, I don't know about that. Hey. I'm gonna blow you away as soon as my life becomes stable again.
Don't you fucking dare! Because every time an artist or a writer becomes stable, it's like, oh, then they don't do anything ever again. They just work their stupid day job and.
Yeah, it could be.
All right. Well, I think we are spinning up on an hour, and so I want to, I want to thank you again for your time, Austin.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, and thanks to our listeners. If this is your first time listening, I hope you'll check out all of our work on WatcherDM.com. You can find.
If you made it this far, you gotta buy Warp Crawl.
In fact, if you made it this far, go check the description of wherever you're watching it and see if there's a link to Warp Crawl on discount. So I'll give you a discount. How's that?
Hey. Saving money.
Everybody's saving money. But yeah, go check out WatcherDM.com. You can also find us on DriveThruRPG or itch.io. And if you would like to support us in creating products like this and our other adventure products, you can do so by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/WatcherDM. Look for the purple eyeball, soon to come on business cards everywhere. I don't know. And I hope we will see you soon. And otherwise, I think we'll just say what we always say. Stay weird.
Stay weird.